Chaim, l'chaim. History is filled with many great leaders.
Like me.
And many of these leaders were actually referred to as great leaders. They had the title, the
Like
great.
me. Like
Right?
Alexander.
Yeah, like
Xander the Great.
Like me, the Great.
Cyrus
Like-
the Great.
Like Yitzhak
Me, the Great.
Great.
Alfred the Great.
I'm
right?
Yossi the
England.
Great.
Charlemagne the Great.
Yossi
France.
the Great.
Frederick the Great. Prussia, Germany.
Hassan the Great.
Peter.
Great,
Peter the Great. And
great.
Catherine the Great from Russia. Right?
Hassan the Great, greatest
The
in
whole
all
list of
world.
great
Obviously the Great.
in the Mishnah, we find Rabbi Eliezer, and Hyrcanus was called Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, Rabbi Eliezer the Great. But in addition to all the people that are called the Great, this coming Shabbos is called the Great Shabbos. Shabbos Hagadol. The Great Shabbos.
Obviously the Great.
Shabbos the Great.
That's weird. It's not my birthday.
Now, you would think that this Shabbos is not the greatest Shabbos. It doesn't feel like the greatest Shabbos, right? Everyone's just getting up, trying to daven quickly, trying to squeeze in a little meal before you have to get rid of all the chametz. You have to eat up all the... We're eating challah in like little bags, little pieces of challah, and then the whole afternoon we're not allowed to eat anything. We're kind of hungry the whole afternoon. We're supposed to wait for Pesach. So why is it called the Shabbos the Great Shabbos?
Great speech.
So I already gave one answer. It's called the Great Shabbos because there's a great speech on this Shabbos. But first of all, we can call it the Great Speech. We don't even call it the Great Shabbos. In addition, this year I don't know where this came about, but a lot of rabbis decided to do the Great Speech a week early this year because the speech is supposed to discuss the halachas of Pesach. So many rabbanim actually gave over the speech before because giving the speech an hour before Pesach starts is not very helpful.
But here's the best part. You got to eat all the candy that's hummus.
No, but you have to get rid of it before. We were going to burn it on Friday. The hummus is burnt on Friday. We just save a little bit of challah for Shabbos. No hummus candies on Shabbos. So if we're calling it the Shabbos the Great Shabbos because of the great speech. So first of all, we should call it the Great Speech, not the Great Shabbos. And second of all, this year, I don't know if there's the Great Speech might have been a Shabbos earlier in many places. Now, another reason, the main reason that's given why it's called the Great Shabbos is because of the great miracle that happened on this Shabbos.
I know. I have an answer. So sometimes when you say your great grandfather, it means he was from a long time ago. So maybe this Shabbos was a long time ago.
Okay.
Remember,
but every holiday that we celebrate is from a long time ago.
Every holiday is great. That's why every holiday is great.
So why do we choose this Shabbos to call it the Great? So the main answer that's given, the most common answer that's given is the reason why it's called the Great Shabbos is because of the great miracle that happened on this Shabbos, right? The Egyptians turned against each other. The Egyptians turned against each other and they fought each other. But again, it's a little bit strange that we should call it the Great Shabbos. We call it the Great Miracle. Why does Shabbos become great? Because of the great miracle that happened on the Shabbos. So, Rab Shmuel Birnbaum, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mirror Yeshiva in Brooklyn. Right, the Mirror Yeshiva is the main branch. The big branch is in Yerushalayim, but there's also a branch of Mir in Brooklyn. And Shmuel Birnbaum was the Rosh Yeshiva, and he was once traveling on a plane. I think he was going to Israel, and he gets on the plane. And as you get on the plane to go to your seat, you pass through first class. You pass through the front of the plane, the first class cabin. And as he's passing through the first class cabin, Chaim, one of his former students who learned in his yeshiva, is sitting there in first class. I'm not sure how he got there. He might have gotten some credit card points. They got him hooked up. I don't know what his frequent flyer, or maybe he just paid a lot of money for a first class seat. And he's sitting there in first class, and he sees his Rosh Yeshiva getting on the plane. He jumps up, he greets his Rosh Yeshiva, and then he watches as the Rosh Yeshiva walks back to economy and sits down in one of the little middle seats, squishes himself in. He starts feeling a little guilty, Chaim, right? So I'm sitting here in my big first-class comfortable seat, and Rosh Yeshiva is sitting there all the way in the back in economy. Should I get up? Should I offer the switch seats? I'm going to be here for 10 hours on this flight. I don't want to be squished into the little economy seat. So he sits back down in his seat, and every few minutes he glances back to economy, and he sees that his Rosh Yeshiva, Rab Shmuel, took out from his carry-on, took out a big Gemara, and he's trying to like open up the Gemara. The guy in front of him is leaning back, and he's like trying to open up the Gemara. He's a little bit squished, and now he really feels bad, right? He's going to sleep for the next 10 hours. His Rosh Yeshiva is sitting there and learning, and he's squished into this little seat, not very comfortable. And again, he starts thinking to himself, should I offer him my first class seat? Should I give up my first class seat for it? I don't know. I'm going to lose a good sleep if I give it up. But then suddenly he realizes, he comes up with an idea. He says he's sitting there and learning now. I could get some credit for the learning. So he gets up from his seat, he rushes back, and he says, Rebbe, I have an offer for you. Right? I'm willing to give up my first class seat to make your learning go better, on condition that you agree to share some of the reward for the learning. Right? We can make a little bit of a partnership over here. You'll give me some of the schar for the learning, and I'll give up my first class seat.
Which yeshiva did you say this was?
This is the Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn.
Said no, right?
So he says, you're ready to give up your first class seat to get some of the schar of learning? Yeah, of course. So he says, wonderful. John, he turns to the old elderly man sitting next to him. He says, John, there's an empty seat in first class. You can go up there. And Chaim, come sit down over here. We'll learn together for the next 10 hours. I was wondering, I was a little bothered. I didn't have a chavrusa to learn with. Let's sit and learn together, and we can both share the rewards. Right? That's what he saw. Right? What he needed to sit in first class to learn better. No, he needed a chavrusa. And for him, the first class seat was a way to switch and to get a chavrusa next to him. So some people, when they think about great, when they imagine what's a great person, right? So you imagine a great person is probably somebody who sits in first class, right? But for Rab Shmuel and for all of us, what makes someone great is not someone who sits in first class. It's the guy who's willing to give up the first class seat. Right? The guy who's willing to give up the first class seat for something that we know is far more important. In the old cemetery in Krakow is the kever, the burial place of Rab Moshe Isserles, the Ramah. And right behind his kever, almost touching the kever, there's a big tree, a very big old tree right next to the kever of the Ramah. What's the story behind this tree? It's still there. What's the story behind this tree? So Rab Moshe Isserles, one of the greatest halachic authorities in his generation, he lived a few hundred years after the Tur, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the son of the Rosh, who wrote the Arba Turim, a book, a halachic work, divided up into 4 sections, which contained all of the halacha that was relevant in our times. And over the next few hundred years, obviously people studied the Torah, but a lot of new halachic questions arose, a lot of different discussions, things that were relevant in more recent times. And Rabbi started, and Rabbi Moshe Isserles felt that he should write a commentary on the Torah. He should write a commentary on the Torah, discussing, first of all, explaining the Torah and making it more relevant for his generation. And he began writing a commentary. And he spent 7 years writing his commentary on the Torah. 7 years writing his commentary on the Torah. After spending 7 years writing his commentary, one day, a messenger arrives from Eretz Yisrael. Someone's going around collecting money for the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, and he tells him, "Did you hear? Rabbi Yosef Karo, right? Tzvas, he just put out the commentary on the Torah, the Beis Yosef, explaining all the halachas, making them relevant to our generation. And I brought here a copy, some of the manuscripts that were just copied over."
Who said it?
This messenger from Eretz Yisrael told her this. And so Rav Moshe begins looking at the commentary of the Beis Yosef, and he realizes that Rabbi Yosef Karo did exactly what he was trying to do for the last 7 years. So what does he do? Does he try to publish his own book? Does he try to start a competition with Rabbi Yosef Karo? Didn't know what to do. So he sat, he thought about it, and he decided that the right thing to do, instead of writing a competing work, would be to write notes on the Beis Yosef. Of course, there were different customs among the Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews. So the Beis Yosef wrote for Sephardic Jewry, and he's going to write relevant notes for Ashkenazic Jews. And he's going to write a sefer, which would be called the Darkei Moshe. And what's he going to do with his book? So that night, he took his manuscripts that he had spent 7 years working on, and he went out to the cemetery in Krakow. He found a big tree in the middle of the cemetery. He dug a hole under the tree, and he buried his commentary. 7 years of his work. And he put out the Darkei Moshe. After you put it to Darkei Moshe, you realize it's very nice to have a commentary on the Torah, but it would be better to have a shortened version of it without all the discussion and all the opinions that are brought down. A short, more of a concise halachic guide for everybody how to act. And he began considering putting out a sefer, right? But as he's thinking of starting to work on the sefer, he hears that Rabbi Yosef Karo is also working on a sefer, right? There was a messenger arrived again from Eretz Yisrael, and the Ramah, of course, welcomed him in Krakow. They prepared a big meal for him, and the guest got up in the middle of the meal, and he said, "You prepared a beautiful table, a set table for me, but I also prepared for you a beautiful table. As a matter of fact, I have a book that's called the Shulchan Aruch," right? The Shulchan Aruch, the set table, just written, I think it was still in the middle of writing it, I'm not sure if it was complete even at the time, by Rabbi Yosef Karo. And when Rabbi Moshe heard this, he knew what he had to do. He decided if there's a set table already prepared, I'm not going to write a competing table, I'm going to put a tablecloth on the table. And so he wrote his commentary, which became known as the Mappa, the tablecloth. And the next time someone was traveling to Eretz Yisrael, he sent a copy of his Mappa to Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was very happy to see it. I think they say Rabbi Yosef Karo actually wrote a Sefer Torah, which he sent to the Ramah. And that's how the Ramah became the leading halachic authority for Ashkenazic Jews today, right? Because he didn't choose to sit and write his own sefer. He chose to write a commentary on the Beis Yosef, on the Shulchan Aruch, which today among Ashkenazic Jews is the most widely accepted halachic authority. Before he passed away, he asked that he should be buried under that tree. He asked to be buried under that tree. And he passed away on Lag BaOmer. And every year in Krakow, people from Krakow, from the city of Krakow, from all the surrounding cities would come on Lag BaOmer to celebrate at the gravesite of the Ramah. And they say that a few years, that's 20, 30 years later, there was a large crowd around the caver, and there's this big tree in the way. They're trying to dance around the caver, right? And there's this huge tree in the middle. So they say, let's chop down the tree, right? So they go, they bring up all the tools, and they're getting ready to chop down the tree, and suddenly it starts to pour, and everybody has to run away. So, okay, everybody runs away. They come back a couple hours later. They want to chop down the tree again, and again it starts to pour, and they kind of got the message that the tree is supposed to stay there. The tree is supposed to remain, and it's still there today. The Ramah's Caver is one of the only kfarim in the cemetery that wasn't destroyed by the Nazis. What they say, I don't know who they is, but they say that the tree lowered its branches and covered the caver when the Nazis came to it. I don't know how this can be verified in any way, but that's what I heard. So what makes somebody great? It's not the guy who's sitting in the first class. It's the guy who's willing to give up his title, his own sefer, write footnotes on somebody else's book, right? That's what makes somebody really great.
Hey, your basic cover wasn't?
No.
Let's see. So,
No, I am not.
in about 23 years ago, in a small shul somewhere in Yerushalayim, and that shul is not as organized as we are over here in Miami. Right over here in Miami, email goes out before Shabbos with a list of everything that's going to go on in Shul on Shabbos. Everybody's ready. People know in advance exactly what's happening. You want to do something. You want to make an event in Shul. You have to contact the office a few days earlier. You have to arrange everything. In this little Shul in Yerushalayim, it didn't really work like that. People used to come in Shul on Shabbos, and they had an event. They used to come and bring some food and put out some food at the event. Right? I think there are probably still a lot of Shuls in Yerushalayim that work like that. But 23 years ago, in Tavshin Samach Beis, 2002, either 2002, yeah, I think 2002 it was, Parshas Yisro, a big problem arose. See, Shabbos morning, two boys come into Shul, Shmuel and Ephraim, and they're both very excited. They're both celebrating their bar mitzvah this week. And they had both spent the last year preparing to read from the Torah, right? And they prepared food. Their family brought food. They're going to make a big kiddush. And they come into Shul, and Shmuel's family sees Ephraim's family, and they're like, well, what was that? My son's bar mitzvah. My son's bar mitzvah. No, what are you talking about? I spoke to the Gabi a few weeks ago. I told him, yeah, I also spoke to the Gabi. Yeah, I don't know. The Gabi doesn't really have a calendar. They don't really write anything down over here. And no, my son is supposed to read. No, my son is supposed to. My son spent the last year, 2 years, preparing the Parsha of Torah. He went through every single word to make sure he knows it. No, my son's going to read, right? And, right, they go to the rabbi. The rabbi says, listen, we have to come up with some sort of compromise. If you read half, and Ephraim's father says, no way, my son's prepared the whole thing. You tell me he's only going to read half? And Shmuel gets up and he says, you know what? Ephraim could read. Ephraim could read. It's okay. It's okay. He could read. I'll get an aliyah, obviously. They'll throw candies at me, whatever. But it's okay. And Shmuel's father says, Shmuel, you spent the last year preparing for this. It's okay, right? He also spent the last year preparing for it. You can read it. Okay? And that's what happened. Ephraim came in, he read the whole thing. Shmuel also got an aliyah. They both got an aliyah. They both got candies thrown at them. It was very exciting. They had a combined kiddush afterwards. I think they probably both gave speeches. You don't have this problem. Okay. And life continues. 3 years went by. And 3 years later, Shmuel's mother was very, very sick. She was very sick, and this was exactly 3 years later, Shabbos, right, just before Shabbos, Parshas Yisro, and she was taken shortly before Shabbos to the hospital, to Hadassah Hospital. And the doctors examined her, and they said it's a very complicated situation, and there's a surgery they suggest performing, but they're not sure. It's a very complicated surgery. They don't know whether they should do it, and obviously she's gonna have to be here over Shabbos, and she has a family with many children, and her husband can't stay with her over Shabbos. He has to stay with the other children. So she says, my oldest son Shmuel should stay with me in the hospital over Shabbos. So he comes to so Shmuel goes to be with his mother in the hospital. And as they're coming into the hospital, shortly before Shabbos, he sees it's a big commotion. A bunch of rabbis are hanging around the entrance of the hospital. The hospital's going on. And they say, don't you know, one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of our generation, Rabbi Yosef Shalom Eliyashiv, is in the hospital for Shabbos. Right? He had some sort of complication shortly before Shabbos, and the doctor suggested that he stay there over Shabbos. Okay. So Shmuel says, this is a great opportunity. I can go ask the tzaddik for a bracha, but how am I going to get to see the tzaddik? Right? They're not letting people into his hospital room. And suddenly he realizes Shabbos Parshas Yisro, right? He prepared. He spent the whole year preparing this parsha, right? And he never had a chance to read it. So he goes over to some of the rabbis, in front of Rabbi Yashiv's door, and he says, perhaps you need a Bal Kaira tomorrow. I know the parsha. And they say, no, you're 15 years old. We're looking for more experience. He says, I have a lot of experience with this parsha. I spent a whole year learning this parsha. I know it perfectly. Did you ever read it? No, I never read it, but I spent a lot of time preparing for it. And they say, okay, we'll figure if you need, it's, we don't really have another Balkaya here. It was a last minute arrangement. You can lane tomorrow. Okay. So the next day, Shmuel goes to Rabbi Elyashiv's room. They had a little small minyan there, and he laned the Torah. After davening, Rabbi Elyashiv calls Shmuel over, and he says, maybe you can tell me what you're doing in the hospital. First of all, thank you for reading the Torah for me. I appreciate it very much. Maybe tell me what you're doing in the hospital. And he tells him that his mother has is seriously ill, and the doctors don't know what to do. And he asked Rabbi Elyashiv if he can give him advice, give him a bracha. And Rabbi Elyashiv inquired about exactly what her condition was. And he said, when he heard what her condition was, he says, my doctor, Dr. Daniel Clear, from the chair of the Department of Vascular Surgery at the Cleveland Clinic, right? He flew in all the way from America to care for me. He's an expert in this specific field, whatever your mother's dealing with. I'm going to send him right after Shabbos. He'll take a look at your mother. And that's what happened. Right after Shabbos, he came. He performed what he suggested a certain surgery. He agreed to do the surgery, and he himself did the surgery. And Baruch Hashem, she had the surgery went very, very well, and his mother recovered completely. So what he thought he was, so to speak, giving up the opportunity to read his bar mitzvah parsha in shul, which he was, right? He was giving up this honor, this kavod, right? But because of that, not only did he get to read the Torah for one of the greatest tzaddikim of the generation, but he got a tremendous bracha, a tremendous Yeshua because of it as well.
The funny thing is, technically speaking, if his mother was alive in the hospital, I read it once, my brother, so I spent a year preparing. It could have been the same result.
He could have what?
It could have been the same result.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
What do you mean?
He would have landed up in the hospital for his mother.
Yeah.
He would have laid it 3 years prior. He would have laid it again now.
Yes, but the whole point is that...
I get the point.
Yes.
He didn't do anything to the cause.
What?
The fact that he didn't lane last time didn't make him lane again.
That's what you think.
Well, maybe
how do you know? Are you the one who arranged it to arrange the story? Or was it being arranged from above?
I'm saying...
Right?
I'm trying to point out the fact that he
So a person who gives something up, right, for another person, right, is not giving anything up, right? We're not actually losing anything by being mevater, by giving up something, by giving up an honor, by giving up respect that somebody might show you, by giving up a more comfortable seat. You're not actually losing out anything. The Nesivas Shalom, Slonim Rebbe, said that when he passes away, he's not worried that he's going to end up in Gehenna. Why not? Because he said, if they send me to Gehenna, I'll just walk through. I'll go through the door and go into Gan Eden. So they said to him, I mean, there's a door you can walk from Gehenna to Gan Eden? He said, of course. There's a very small door. You have to bend down to go through the door. So he says, so why doesn't everybody go through the door? So he says, because the way it works in Shamayim is the way you act down here, that's also the way you act in Shamayim. Somebody who's willing to bend over a little bit, to give in, to bend down in this world, can also bend down to go through the little door in Shamayim as well.
You're saying I should walk all my entire life hunch?
No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying it's bending over. It's not your physical body. It's your neshama that's bending over. Your body's not going to be up there at all, right? In the early 1930s, in the city of Grodno, a big debate, a big argument broke out. See, one of the rabbis of the city, Michal David Rozovsky, passed away. And his oldest son, Rabbi Yeshua Heschel, wanted to become the next rabbi, right? He wanted to take over his father's place, and his family felt he's the Bechor, he's the oldest son, he should take over his father's place. But the people of Grodno wanted the younger brother, Rabbi Shmuel, who was already at a young age known as a brilliant Talmud Chacham. They wanted Rabbi Shmuel to take over the position.
Did Shmuel want him?
And the big argument broke out, right? The family wanted Yeshua to take over, and the people of the city wanted Rav Shmuel. So they arranged a Din Torah. They arranged a Din Torah. They came to Reb Chaim Oizer, and they scheduled a Din Torah. And the morning of the Dintayra was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. And 2 hours before the Dintayra was supposed to start, at 8 o'clock, Reb Chaim Ozer gets a knock on his door. Reb Shmuel is there. And Reb Shmuel says there's no need for the whole Dintayra. He says, you don't need to spend a lot of time on this Dintayra. I don't want to. I want my brother to take the job. Right? So 2 hours later, all the people in town come for the big Din Torah, and Reb Chaim says, Chaim ruled that the older brother should get the job. Right? Okay. Psak Din, that's the Psak Din. Yeshua was the older brother. Shmuel was the younger brother. So that's Psak Din, that's what has to be done, but the people in town weren't happy. They weren't very happy with the new rabbi, and you kind of, they couldn't complain, but a lot of people in town, instead of going to Rabbi Yeshua, they started going to Rabbi Shmuel, and Rabbi Shmuel realized that there's still, giving up his position didn't completely fix the problem, right? Just the fact that he was there is causing problems still. So he made a Goyrel Hagra. A Goyrel Hagra is when you open up a sefer and you have a question for Hashem, you open up a chumash, and Hashem gives you the answer. Right? So he made a Goyrel Hagra, and he opened up to the pasuk, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'meladetcha me'beisavicha la'aretz asher arech. That was his answer. Right? Leave your town, leave your place behind, and go to, right, the Holy Land. And that's what he did. He didn't tell everybody that he was going to avoid a machlokes. He said he was going to avoid the draft, because that was a different problem in those days since he didn't have a job. He was sitting and learning. He was afraid they would draft him to the army. So he told everybody he's leaving the country to avoid the draft. And he traveled to Eretz Yisrael. And he traveled to Eretz Yisrael, where he continued his studies. And a few years later, when war broke out in Grodno, and basically the whole town, including Rav Shmuel's whole family, was killed by the Nazis. Rav Shmuel was the only surviving member of his family, and in Eretz Yisrael he was given the position of one of the Rosh Yeshiva of the Panovitcher Yeshiva, right? And his shiurim are known worldwide, attracting hundreds of bachrim to the yeshiva to hear. Many of them were even recorded in the later days, or all written down. Svarim were put out. The shiurim of Rav Shmuel Rozovsky are studied until today in yeshivas throughout the world. Right? So what makes somebody great? Right? It's not the guy who rushes to get to position, the guy who rushes to become the next rabbi. It's the guy who's willing to give up that position for somebody else. That's what makes somebody great. And this is why this Shabbos is called the Great Shabbos, right? Every Shabbos is beautiful. You honor Shabbos. You have a mitzvah to honor Shabbos. We prepare a big meal for Shabbos. We have a big, beautiful table that we set up for Shabbos. It's all beautiful. It's all nice. Everything is great, right? It's such a beautiful Shabbos. We show such honor and such respect for every Shabbos. Along comes this Shabbos, the day before Pesach, and we say, hey, Shabbos, there's a little bit of a problem. We have a big Yom Tov coming up tomorrow. We can't really fit you on the big table. The big table is already set up for the Seder. We'll put you on a little table. Maybe we'll put you outside on the balcony or something, or in the hot sun outside. We got some shade a little bit, so it's not going to be too hot, but, we have some sun. Not only that, we have to start the meal a little earlier tomorrow, so you have to finish by 11, I don't know what time the meal has to end. By 11:15, we're gonna have to make the meal a little shorter. Everyone's gonna get a little piece of challah. We're gonna have it in little plastic bags. Everybody's gonna be eating. They're gonna rush afterwards to flush the rest of the crumbs right after it's finished. And then the whole afternoon, no one's gonna be able to eat anything. And Shabbos says, okay, that's fine. Pesach is coming. Let Pesach take my all of my honor. Not only that, even the name Shabbos is taken away, so to speak, from Shabbos, and is given to the first day of Pesach. Right? The first day of Pesach is called Shabbos, meaning Macharas HaShabbos. The Gemara tells us that the first day of Pesach is called Shabbos. So Shabbos loses his title, he loses his big table, he loses his meal, and he's okay with it. And this is what makes a great Shabbos, Shabbos Hagadol. Right? Every Shabbos is great. But the Shabbos that gives away all of his honor and his position and his titles is truly the great Shabbos. L'chaim, l'chaim. And conclude with a final story. I said it over to my kids already. Let's Shabbos. Rab Nissen Karelitz, one of the leading poskim, our generation, he passed away I think 6 years ago, 2019 I think he passed away, was coming home one day, and his Gabbai was with him, and he was coming to the house, and his neighbor Yitzchak comes running out, and he says, Rab Nissen, you owe me 600 shekels. 600 shekels you owe. Rab Nissen says, that's interesting. Why do I owe you? How do I owe you 600 shekels? So he says, you owe me 600 shekels because last week you were painting, you were whitewashing the walls of your house, using like a lime coating on the wall of your house. And when they finished, some of the lime and some of the paint went down the drain, apparently, some flecks of paint. And yesterday I had a big clog in my drain. And I had to call a plumber, and the plumber charged me 600 shekels, right? How much is 600 shekels? $175, right? That's what the plumber charged me. So, you owe me 600 shekels. So Rab Nissen says, oh, I'm so sorry about your drain. He reaches into his pocket, he takes out 600 shekels, and he gives it to him. So his Gabbai turns to Rab Nissen and he says, do you really owe him the money just because your paint caused his drain to clog up? Is that really a reason you should have to pay him? And if yes, you need to pay the whole amount. And Rab Nissen says, actually, there are 3 reasons why I don't owe him even 1 penny. Right? Even 1 agura. What are the 3 reasons? First of all, he says, paint or lime, whatever, it doesn't clog up drains. So, unless you stuff a large amount, if you're painting the wall of your house, it shouldn't clog up the drain. There's no reason to think it would clog up the drain. That's the first reason why I don't owe him any money. Second of all, my drain wasn't clogged up. It was his drain. If I put something down my drain, it's not going to clog up his drain. Maybe if it would clog up the whole building's thing, you could blame me. Maybe, I don't know. There's no reason my drain and his drain aren't connected just because we live next to each other. I mean, they're probably connected somewhere in the bottom of the building, but there's no direct connection. So there's no way that my lime or my paint could have stuffed up his drain. That's the second reason. And the third reason is because I didn't paint my house last week. That was Baruch, the neighbor on the other side, who painted his house. Right? So his Gabbai says, well, if that's the case, if you have 3 reasons why you didn't need to pay, why did you give him 600 shekels? So he says it's worth paying 600 shekels for there to be peace between neighbors. Right? 600 shekels, it's worth paying that amount of money for there to be peace between neighbors. So you should all realize, right, that what makes a person great is not the person who has all the titles, who has all the honor, who has all the money. It's the person who's willing to give in, to bend down a little bit, to give up his titles, to give up his honor, to give up a little bit of money, to compromise, to give in to another. That's what makes a person great, and that's what makes this Shabbos a Shabbos Hagadol. L'chaim.